Hello, welcome back to another CloudVPN training. Today we will be covering the CloudVPN user management. So hold on to your shoes while we run straight into this complex yet simple integration of the user management. So in this video presentation, we'll be talking about the introduction of the user management system, the structure. We'll talk about how to connect the dots when we are making, once we understand more about the structure. And then the last section that we'll be going through would be actually an example of how to plan your user roles and access. We have more to talk about that later on. So without further ado, let's move forward. So the CloudVPN user management. So a quick introduction about the user management. So the user management features was included to actually, with the understanding that more and more people are getting into different roles and having multiple roles as well. So we understand in this day and age, people are taking multiple roles. They are both the system administrator and also the engineer, and things might get complicated when you have multiple roles and things that you need to do on a system, which is why this user management feature is actually included to be very flexible. But with that flexibility, with the fine-grained control it gives you, it adds a bit of complexity to it. So we'll try our best to actually explain it in this video. So the user management structure. The user management actually breaks into two different sides to it. So we have the groups, and then we have the roles as well. So whenever you create a new user, you need to select whether it's a company-wide user, which will give you, or a group-wide user. So having a company-wide user or a group-wide user will actually determine what devices you have access to in this case. So if you are a company-wide role, you will have access to all devices within your company, within the CloudVPN company, of course. And then if you have a group-specific role, and depending on the machines that you have grouped, you only have access to that specific roles. And within the roles itself, it also gives you different access categories. So access categories will actually define what you're able to do. In this case, like the fine details, whether you can access VPN, whether you can see different pages in your CloudVPN, that is actually defined under your access category, which is part of your roles. So a broad example of user management in this case would be, we have two different companies. So let me bring out the laser pointer. So we have the APAC group, and then we have the Europe group. So for example, when you create a user and then you create it as a group-based user, the group-based user, when you add, you can have either select APAC, Europe, or Americas in this case. So when you have a group-based user added to the APAC group, you will only see the machines or the routers that is within the APAC group. The same can be said for the Europe and Americas in this case. But what differs as well would be the roles. So for example, an engineer role, as you can see, all the engineer has the same role. In this case, all of them can see page alpha, and then they can access VPN, whereas you have an end user role who can only see page alpha and see page beta in this case. So the groups will determine what devices you can access, which devices you can access, and then the roles itself, end users, engineers, and things like that will actually determine what you can do with the devices and machines you have access to. Okay, that brings it close to the slide example of a group role or the user management structure. So the next we'll dive into what is the user management structure in terms of groups in this case. So Like I mentioned, when you have a group, you only have access to the machines or devices or the routers that is within the same group that you have created. We have more examples of that later. But also, when you create a user that is part of, for example, an EMEA group, who you have given the ability to invite more users, the user's authority will not exceed out of its own, meaning that when this user who is part of the EMEA group sends an invite to another end user, the end user can only access EMEA group. So like the original user cannot invite a user to the APAC group, for example, of course. So the very next question you might have is, so where can you actually create or edit the groups that your devices or routers belongs to? In this case, so basically you go to apps, then you hit to admin, and then within admin, just click on groups, and then you can actually create or rename different groups that you have. In this case. And after which, you'll be wondering how you can actually assign different devices to the different groups, of course. And that can be done quite easily as well. So you go to apps, and then you go to Fleet Manager. So select the device that you want to go to, and then click on the groups, and then select which group it belongs to. One device can actually belong to multiple groups as well. So next, we can do a bit of practical thought theory in that sense to actually try to understand more about the user groups. For example, if we have a customer that builds water filtration systems, so that company is actually called Clean Water AB. Clean Water AB bought several different routers, and they are installing all the different routers onto their system, and then shipping the system to different end users that they have to actually monitor the system and also give them access for different services as well. So within this Clean Water AB, you have a top level user. We'll talk more about that later. And then we have the first group, which is the first customer that they have, called GluTech Private Limited. Next, they have another customer called Wally Marine. Wally Marine has 3 routers. GluTech has 2 routers. And then group 3, the third group that they have as a group, in a sense, is called Singer Foundry itself. So all these 3 different companies have different number of routers, and then they are part of different groups in this case. So if you look into that different hierarchy, the company-wide role, which is also usually the platform administrator, the person who owns the right, will actually have access to the whole company. That means that it can actually access all the devices within the whole company. So in this example, maybe it's a good time for you to pause and maybe write down on a piece of paper how many devices each group can actually access to. So in this example, of course, company-wide one, we have 9 routers. So you can actually count total, there's 9 routers. And then for GluTech Private Limited, they can actually access 2 devices. Wally Marine can access 3 devices, and Singa Group can actually access 4 devices. So I hope this small example can actually help guide you on how groups can actually affect the number of devices you can see. So if you are having a company-wide role, you will have the ability to see all the devices within your company. But if you're having a group-specific role, you can only see devices that are within your group. And next, we'll talk about the roles and access categories that is part of the user management in this case. So what is the user role? So user role basically are labels. So I know we try not to label things or people in life, but within the CloudVPN platform, we are happy to do that. You can put labels on different users. So each roles is actually tied to what actions they can perform or what they can see in terms of the different dashboards or pages that you create as well. So some examples of these things, that actions or things that you can see would be whether they can access the VPN, so they can connect VPN to the end device, the devices at the site, whether you can access different HTTP services pages that you have created, or the different pages that you have in terms of dashboards when you clicked into a router on the platform page as well. So what actions they can perform is actually tied to access categories. Don't be too worried right now. We'll go through that in detail. So what makes up a role in this case? So when you have a role, it breaks down to, actually it has two distinct attributes. Number one, you have the group type. So the group type will, like I mentioned in the previous section that we have, it actually determines whether you have company-wide access or whether you have device-specific access or whether you have group access. And then you have the access categories. So access categories will determine what are the actions that you can do. So in essence, a role would have these two distinct attributes. So to put that into context, let's imagine a company that has 3 different roles. So we have a platform admin, we have a engineer, and we have a end user. Okay, each end user has a different kind of group type. Platform admin, basically company-wide role. And then we have an engineer. Engineer could be company-wide and could be group or device specific. That really depends on the structure or what kind of access you want to give when you create the company. Of course, that's really up to you. And then you have the end users, who are often the last customer or the users that are using your machines once you have installed them. So those are usually group specific as well. So next, we'll talk about access categories. So access categories, like I previously mentioned as well, it actually determines the actions that you can actually do within the portal. So things like whether you can access the VNC service, whether you can access VPN services, dashboards, and things like that. It's actually determined on how you set up the access category, depending on the role itself. So each role can have actually different access categories set up as well. So you can see that there are some access that is removed from the engineers, and then we have some more access things that is removed from the end user as well. The slides will be actually sent out for you to understand more. So there's a legend right here, just for your information. So next, we'll then do a small test about the understanding of the overall user management right now. So just to recap, we have the typical roles that we have created on the previous slide. And then so these are the roles. Now attach it to a specific user in this case. So a user can have one role or multiple roles, depending on how you set it up. Remember, we designed the system for people who are wearing multiple hats as well. So we have 3 different distinct users. We have Marlin, we have Rosa, and we have Melody. Marlin is the platform administrator. She has company-wide access and these access categories in this case. Then we have Rosa, who's the engineer. In this example, could be, like I said, could be company-wide, could be group-specific, up to you. And then she has these distinct access categories set up to as a user, inside her role as an engineer. And then you have Melody, a user who's given this specific role as end user. And then you have the different group specific settings. And then you also have the access categories that is for an end user itself. So now the question comes, when I ask who has the access to basically the VPN, the system dashboard, or the machine output as well. So this might be a good time for you to pause the video, write your answers down on a piece of paper, or maybe just give it a quick think through. So who has access to the VPN? Marlin and Rosa. So you can see VPN here, and not on Melody. Next, who has access to the dashboards? So all three of them has actually access to the system dashboard, as you can see here. And then finally, who has access to the machine output page? In this case, so it's dashboard page basically, like in our examples of legends we have spoke about in this case. So the answer is actually Marlin and Melody in this case. So as you can see, when you put different users, specific people into roles, given their selected roles, they would then get access or views or notifications depending on that particular role itself. So you might now ask, so how do you create roles and access categories in the system itself? So very easily go to apps, admin, and then just go to roles and then edit. So you can actually select the different roles that you require in this case, and then press apply. Editing the role, you can actually edit the role and then have the access category as well. So in this example, right now I'm creating an end user role, and then I'm giving it the same same access categories that we actually discussed in the previous slide as well. So the access categories is actually below. So this is actually where you can create all the different access category. Right now is a good time to say as well. So when you create all these roles and access category, it doesn't get tied to any particular service yet. So that is a requirement that we need to do slightly later as well. So the next question you have is, okay, I have the roles set up, but how do I assign it to an actual user in this case? So you can actually assign it to the user when you go to the main portal, and then you go to users. When you invite a new person, or you can actually edit a current user to have different roles, or you can give it multiple roles as well. So basically just do that from the user under the portal itself. And you can even give them temporary access to specific services in this case. So for example, if I wanted Melody to have a temporary access as an engineer, I can give her a secondary role, and then give the secondary role in that sense to actually have a expiring time to the end of the week. So she can actually do some of the things that Rosa can do until the end of the week. So that is actually an extremely useful feature. So I hope the previous few sections about the introduction and the user management structure was clear with our examples that we have given. Next, we'll talk about how to connect all the different dots together to actually understand the full system. So just to recap what we have learned so we have learned about the difference between the groups and the roles. So we have groups where you can affect the devices you can see. And then roles basically slightly affects what are the devices you can see in terms of group or company-wide in this case. So groups are tied to machines, roles are tied to people. Okay, so next we have the different views as well. The services, the views, and the notification, which part of access category. So that is what actually makes up roles. So basically groups and access category makes up a role. Then we also actually learn how to create roles and access category and how to assign them as well. So I hope that was clear. So moving on to the next part, we'll talk about how to assigning the different services, the pages, the notification to the right access category in this case. So like I previously mentioned, when you create the access category on the admin page and then assign it to different roles, that doesn't mean anything until you specifically tie it to different services, pages, and notifications in the app itself. So we'll run through the steps on doing that. So basically, when you, in this example, for example, if you want to set up the VPN service with the right access category. So remember, we have an access category called VPN users that we have created in this case. So basically, what you do is go to Fleet Manager and then go to the specific device itself. Right down on the bottom, we have the services. Click on VPN, and then under access category, basically choose VPN users, and then press. That will be actually automatically saved, and then just return in this case. So that means that only users with the access category VPN users will be able to access VPN to this particular device. Next, we'll talk about how to actually assign different pages, like your dashboard, in this case, to the right access category. So basically the same thing, go to Fleet Manager instead of and the device itself. So go directly to View. And then within the view, select the page that you want to have to that particular access category. So you have different dashboards. So like, for example, system dashboard is for this page. Select it, press save, and then that will be applied. So any user who has this access category will be able to see this page on this unit. So it's important to know it's still on this particular unit. And finally, we'll talk about how to actually assign notifications with the right user access category. So for notifications, it's the same as well. Go to Fleet Manager, go to Device. Instead, go to More in this case. So just click on More, and then depending on where the notification is, for example, add a notification, select what kind of notification is required. So this does need a subscription, just in case you know. Set it up correctly, and then select the correct access category in this case. And then once you do that, then any person or any users with this particular access category will receive this notification. So you might be, what we have actually went through is how the steps in assigning on one particular router, setting up the different pages or setting up the different service to specific access category. So each services and page can have different access category or can have the same. So for example, you can have VPN page, system overview, and notification share one single access category, but that's really up to you on how you want to design as well. So my personal preference is actually having distinct names for different kind of access you want, so you can actually give very fine detail in how to give the different kind of user access you want to give when you are designing a user role. In this case, we do have some examples later as well. So like I mentioned, whenever we do this, configuration is always to a particular device. And then you must be wondering, oh, this is crazy, I have to repeat it so many times. So for me, I always tell all our users, it's a good practice once you have done this on a particular device, save this device template, save this as a device template. So the next time when you have a new router added in to your system, basically you can actually apply this device template to the router, and then you actually copy all the different access category to different services down to this router as well. So you don't have to actually do it again. So it's actually saving you a lot more time when you do that. Finally, in the last section, we'll talk about how to plan your user roles and access in this case. So there are many different ways to plan your user roles and access. The example that we'll be showing today is just only one of many ways that you can do it. And there's no one correct method. On everyone's method is correct. Essentially, in this case, you just have to make sure what you're doing, of course. So I do have a slide showing an example of a access control matrix. That is also in an Excel format that will be provided later on as well. So I hope that will be useful if you are designing your user roles and access. So some of the suggestion on how you can actually go about planning this user access role. So number one, plan your user access matrix in this case. So I have the example that you can borrow as well. And then step two, create the different access categories and roles accordingly. Give it a proper naming convention so you know what that access category and role is. Next, then you have to configure, like I mentioned in the previous few sections of the training, we have gone through on how to actually configure the right services to the right category. And finally, we have the last step where you can actually verify once you have set up. So you can actually verify, ask your different users to log in to make sure that they have the different views that they require or do not have in this case as well. So here is the sample of the access control matrix that we have. So basically, if you look at the example, just basically I have a list of names in this case. And then I actually separated into different groups and region. And then we have either a company-wide role or a group region role in this case. And then I have different access categories. I split it up into services like VPN, VNC, different dashboard and pages. So like each router will have 4 different pages, but then not everyone can see for all 4 different pages. And then I have 2 kinds of notification. One is connectivity status. Another one is the production status, whether there's an alarm as well. So within using this matrix, you can then actually assign, in this case, what kind of roles each person should have. In this case, so for example, Rico, myself, I'm an administrator, so I have a company-wide role. I have access to everything. So that should be added within your access control setup in the admin page later on as well. So then we have Magnus, who doesn't have the notification, so as to the rest of my team. So basically, these 3 users can actually share one single row while I keep the administrator role in this case. So again, when you set it up, you should do it in this case. So these would be PM team / product specialist in my next slide. So to make it simpler in this case. Then we have different offices or different regions. Then we have different users, Ufalka, Eric, within the same group, but then they have different roles as well. So like this guy is a energy auditor, and then you have a device status and user information. So basically, using this matrix, you can actually plan clearly what role has what access in this case. So repeated role can just basically copy and paste the same access as well later on. So if you see that a new role is required, you can actually create a new role. So again, like I mentioned, there is no this is not the only way to design your access control matrix. So it's really up to you. We do provide the Excel file for you as well if you do want to use our example of our access control matrix. So, like I mentioned, once you do the different examples, when you add it inside the system, basically when you go to admin app and then you do the roles part, when you set a role, the PM team / product specialist should have the same services and access control categories that you set up over here. In this case, so it should always be there. So this is under the admin page inside the roles itself. So once you have done that, all your users should have the right information. So it's always good to verify different roles, what they can do, what they can't do, of course, as well. So essentially, you could have a secondary email account set up, and then you can invite and change the role of that person just to make sure that to view through as an user of a different role, make sure you have the right access and not more, not less in this case, and that could save you some trouble as well. What we went through today is the introduction of the user management structure. We talked about the groups and the roles. We talked about how to connect all the different dots together in terms of how groups, roles, and access category works and how that affect the user in this case. Then we also went through a specific example of how you can actually use the access control matrix that we provide to do planning in terms of what and who can have access to what in this case using the access control matrix. I'd like to say again that this is not the model answer, but it's something to get you started with. So hopefully that will help you in your process to use the CloudVPN and to set up better security settings in terms of user management for all your devices as well. So I hope this was a fruitful video to watch. With that being said, thank you for your attention. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and have a nice day whenever you are watching this. Thank you and goodbye.